Hello everyone and welcome to the Good Old Gamer. So today I have a very interesting video for you guys. So on our quest to figure out what is the maximum value for a platform and CPU for PC gaming, today we're going to be taking a look at two of the heavy-hitting top contenders, and that is the Core i5-12400 and also the Core i3-12100. And we're going to be revisiting these guys in a test that is completely CPU bound. So to achieve this, I borrowed my buddy Austin. Thank you, Austin, for allowing this. I borrowed his RTX 3090. So this way we can go ahead and remove the GPU completely out of the equation. Now, the reason why I want to do these tests is to show you guys at very low price points, you can actually push the fastest graphics cards on the planet very well in pretty much all of the titles that I'm testing. Meaning you guys can save a lot of money if you're looking to play similar type games that I'm testing and going ahead and pairing it with whatever graphics card you want. Even next generation RTX 40 series, even if they're twice as fast, the sub $200 market has a lot of value for you. You just have to find the right CPU. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at here today. We're going to check out a few CPUs and continue into the future looking at all of the sub $200 CPUs and see which one is the absolute best for gaming. So I've changed the lineup a little bit. We're going to be looking at 12 games here, and the settings have changed a bit. So kicking things off, we're going to take a look at Borderlands 3, 1080p, high settings, 50% scaling. This is necessary because an RTX 3090 at 1080p, just straight up, is GPU bound on both of these CPUs. And we'll talk more about that at the end, but this way we are 100% CPU bound. So kicking things off with the i3-12100 at stock settings, we have that at 150 FPS average and 105 on the 1% low. We have the overclock model, well, overclocked on the RAM anyway, because, well, you can't overclock locked CPUs, coming in with 3600 CL14 RAM. That comes in at 168 FPS on average and 119 on the 1% low. Taking a look at the 12400 with stock standard 3200 MHz C16, that comes in at 161 FPS on average and 115 on the 1% low. So very close to the tuned 12100. And then when you tune the 12400, I was able to get this up to 3700 MHz on the RAM, so it has a better IMC than the 12100. Also C14, that comes in at 174 FPS on average and 125 on the 1% low. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077, 1080p high, 50% scaling, same thing. We have the 12100 with stock standard cheapo RAM coming in at 128 FPS on average and 84 on the 1% low. Bumping that up to 3600 C14, that gets you up to 141 and 92 on the 1% low, compared to the 12400 that comes in at 151 FPS on average and 99 on the 1% low. So this is actually coming in ahead of the tuned 12100, meaning those extra cores and or extra cache does play a factor in this particular title. And then when you tune the 12400, that also gets you up to 168 FPS on average and 114 on the 1% low. So a significant bump on that 1% low. Next up is Far Cry 5, 1080p high, once again 50% scaling. The 12100 with stock standard RAM comes in at 167 FPS on average and 124 on the 1% low. When you tune the RAM, that gets you up to 185 FPS on average and 139 on the 1% low. Taking a look at the stock standard 12400, we can see 183 FPS on average, and once again, 139 on the 1% low. You are going to notice throughout most of the test, this is going to be the case, which I do find very interesting. Then the i5-12400 with tuned memory comes in at 200 FPS on average and 153 on the 1% low. Next up is Gears 5. This comes in at 1080p high, 67% scaling because, well, we couldn't go down to 50, although we are still GPU bound, so it works just fine in this title. We have the i3-12100 coming in at 3200 MHz CL16 RAM, coming in at 171 FPS on average and 137 on the 1% low, with the 3600 CL14 memory that gets you up to 190 FPS on average and 151 on the 1% low. Once again, taking a look at the 12400 with the 3200 RAM, that comes in at 192 FPS on average and 148 on the 1% low. Just like I mentioned before, you're going to see this quite a lot. And then the 12400 with the 3700 C14 comes in at 203 FPS on average and 157 on the 1% low. So definitely the fastest, but not by as much as most people might think. Halo Infinite, another Microsoft game, as you'll notice, is a little bit different. We had to do 1080p low at 67% scaling. Because we couldn't go any lower, I had to lower the settings here. This is a very GPU-bound game, and honestly, any modern CPU is going to be able to push basically any modern GPU in this particular title. However, I wanted to remove the GPU from the equation as much as possible, so I went ahead and dropped it to low. Anyway, continuing on, we have the i3-12100 with the 3200 RAM coming in at 213 FPS on average and 141 on the 1% low. With the 3600 C14, that gets you up to 238 FPS on average and 159 on the 1% low. So that's a pretty good bump there. The 12400 basically matches. I'm not going to go through the numbers. You can see them yourself. Basically ties the Tune 2100, and the Tune 2400 gets you up to 255 FPS on average and 192 on the 1% low. So the extra cache, the extra cores, the extra 100 megahertz, whatever it is, definitely has a big effect in this particular title. Next up is Horizon Zero Dawn, 1080p high, 50% scaling. We have the 12100 with 3200 megahertz memory coming in at 175 FPS on average and 129 on the 1% low. The 3600 C14 12100 comes in at 189 FPS on average and 139 on the 1% low, virtually tying the 12400 with 3200 C16 RAM. Then looking at the Tune 3700 C14 RAM on the 12400, that gets you up to 200 FPS on average and 148 on the 1% low. Now next up, we're going to take a look at Starcraft 2, which is a very single-threaded game, so we can keep using this as our, well, per core single thread IPC test, essentially. So this is 1080p high, no scaling needed, as it's completely CPU bound. The i3-12100 with 3200 megahertz RAM comes in at 292 FPS on average and 204 on the 1% low. Getting that up to 3600 C14 gets you to 310 FPS on average and 222 on the 1% low. The stock 12400 with 3200 C16 does fall a little bit behind on the 1% low. However, the average is actually higher, coming in at 317 FPS, but the 1% low at 214. So what this says is that the higher cache on the 12400, the L3 cache, does help with the average FPS, but does not help out with the 1% low. This is limited by slower frequencies and higher memory latency. So the 1% low definitely responds to that. Taking a look at the 12400 3700 C14, we have 333 FPS on average, and then we have 229 on the 1% low. So not significantly higher than the 12100. So the 1% low really does not care about cores nor cache. We know about the cores, but it doesn't care about cache either. And the difference that we're seeing is probably due to the fact that the memory is 100 megahertz faster. So that's really the only way to get your 1% lows higher in this game at this point in time, is with higher memory frequency with very tight timings. Next up is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, a game that scales very well. So we go from single thread to very multi-threaded, 1080p high 50% scaling, and we have the 12100 with 3200 megahertz memory coming in at 152 FPS on average and 101 on the 1% low. That jumps up to 170 FPS on average and 115 on the 1% low, looking at the 3600 C14. So if we take a look at the 12400, it's basically the same on the 1% lows, but the average does go up a little bit higher. And then when you tune the 12400 using faster RAM with tight timings, that gets you up to 204 FPS on average and 138 on the 1% low. So you can definitely tell that Tomb Raider really likes those extra cores, especially with the tight memory timings and all of that. So this game will scale with basically anything extra you throw at it. Watchdogs Legion is also kind of an interesting one, as we can see a stair-step effect here. Taking a look at the 12100 with cheapo 3200 C16 RAM, we have 97 FPS on average and 73 on the 1% low. The 12100 with 3600 C14 comes in at 108 FPS on average and 86 on the 1% low. So that is a massive upgrade there just by tuning your RAM. Then the 12400, 3200 stock comes in at 121 FPS on average and 94 on the 1% low. So the extra cores and extra cache do help in this particular game. And then when you tune that up to 3700 C14, gets you up to 142 FPS on average and 110 FPS on the 1% low, making the 1% low faster than the 12100 with stock standard RAM. Next up, we have an oldie but a goodie, Witcher 3. This one does not have scaling options, so we had to do 720p high to make sure we just don't have any GPU bottleneck. The i3 12100 with 3200 MHz C16 RAM comes in at 166 FPS on average and 126 on the 1% low. Coming in with the 3600 C14, that gets you up to 188 and 141 on the 1% low. So a very nice jump there. The 12400 with 3200 MHz RAM, very similar performance here at 187 on the average and 138 on the 1% low. So that's pretty similar to what we've been seeing. So the extra cores and or cache do have an effect in this title. Then the 12400, 3700 C14 comes in at 213 FPS on average and 158 on the 1% low. Once again, getting very, very close to the 12100's average on the 1% low. Now on to the fun stuff. CEMU emulator using Breath of the Wild. I left this at 720p. You could do 1080p on a 3090, it really won't matter, but just because this is the native res and, well, I don't want any GPU bottleneck, went ahead and did that, 240 FPS cap, because we're not gonna get that close anyway. So the i3 12100 with 3200 C16 comes in at 104 FPS on average and 81 on the 1% low. Tuning the RAM gets you up to 110 FPS on average, not that big of a jump, but 88 on the 1% low. Doesn't seem like a lot, but that's about 9%. That's pretty good considering they run at the same clock speeds. The 12400 3200 C16 comes in at 110 FPS on average, tying the other one, and then we have 90 on the 1% low, virtually tying the 12100 with tuned RAM. The 12400 3700 MHz RAM C14 comes in at 115 FPS on average, so a little bit higher, and then 93 on the 1% low. So as you can see, everything kind of scales up a little bit. The cores and cache do make a little bit of a difference on this, but not as big of a deal as you might think. And then finally, we're going to be testing out RPCS 3 using Resistance Fall of Man in a very CPU heavy spot that I found at 720p 240 FPS cap as well. The i3 12100 with stock standard 3200 C16 RAM comes in at 81 FPS on average and 53 on the 1% low. Now this is going to be kind of interesting for a lot of you guys. The 12100 with 3600 C14 comes in at 95 FPS on average, so that's a pretty good bump up. However, the 1% low is still at 54, so virtually the same. Taking a look at the 12400 with stock standard RAM, that comes in at 87 FPS on average and 53 on the 1% low, virtually tying the other two results that we looked at. And then the 12400 with 3700 CL14 RAM comes in at 96 FPS on average, basically matching the 12100, and 57 on the 1% low. So it looks like the extra cache might have a little bit of an effect, but it's still within basically the margin of error here, meaning the 12100 for RPCS 3 is basically on par with the 12400. Whether you tune or not, and if you're using a 60 FPS cap instead of, 240 like I am, you're going to get basically the same results. 57 is a good bit better than 53 or 54, but it's not earth-shattering. Alrighty, so taking a look at the 12-game average, we'll start with the i3 12100 with 3200 C16 RAM. On the 1% lows, the average comes in at 113 FPS on average. The 12100 3600 CL14 comes in with a 1% low average of 125, matching the stock standard 12400, also at 125. So as I said, you're going to be seeing that a lot. So these are basically tied here. And then you have the 12400 with the tuned RAM of 3700 C14 coming in at 140 FPS on average. So that's a pretty good bump up. So taking a look at the i3 12100 stock using just cheapo regular 3200 C16 RAM, going up to either the tuned 12100 or a stock standard 12400, nets you a 10.6% increase. So that's pretty substantial, almost 11% solely from memory tuning or going ahead and spending $60 more on a faster CPU. Whichever way you want to go, it's your call, but using Samsung B-Die for about $20 more than the cheap stuff, I would go that route as it provides better value. Now, taking a look at either the stock 12400 performance or the tuned 12100 performance, going up to the tuned 12400 37C14, that nets you 12% performance increase. So that's actually a pretty good bump there. So what we're seeing is 11 to 12% performance increase simply by using Samsung B-Die and tuning your memory. This is a lot more performance than people think that you can get just from tuning your RAM, because most people don't know that this is a thing. So definitely worth it. By the way, links are down below. If you don't have Samsung B-Die, you can pick them up over on Amazon, on eBay. I would recommend doing it and selling off your current RAM if you don't have these, if gaming is very important to you. Honestly, it's the most performance uplift you can get for the least amount of money. So taking a look at the differences here, you can see that the i3 12100 offers virtually similar performance to something like a 12400. That extra performance gain that you get there, it's about 12%. Is it worth a 60% price increase? You can get a 12100 for about $100, 12100F to be exact, and then the 12400Fs are usually about $160, maybe even $170. That means it costs 60 to 70% more for 12%. Now, this is gonna blow a lot of people's minds because, whoa, I can't deal with a 4-core 8-thread CPU. Well, you can if it's fast enough, and in this case, if you're looking to get the absolute maximum performance for the absolute lowest price, that's a good option. And let's be honest, you can always upgrade in the future when higher core count or faster CPUs become more affordable. So you don't have to do the investing now if gaming is your primary concern. Now, the key to unlocking all of this performance is, as I've been trying to say, using the proper memory, and that is using the Patriot Viper SteelSeries Samsung B-Die kits. Now, these are single rank 2x8 kits, so 16 gigs of RAM. You could, of course, buy 2 of these, go to dual rank, and these are going to be much more affordable than buying 2 16 gigabyte kits. Those are far more expensive. As I just picked up another kit for $60 yesterday, and it was just open boxed. It wasn't used, it was just open boxed. So that's the same amount of money that just a stock standard 3200C16 kit costs, for basically an extra 10 to 15% extra performance depending on the CPU used. So I can't stress enough, that is the most beneficial performance per dollar that upgrade that you can do in your system. And we're taking a look at something like Zen 4, where AMD is talking about a 15% performance increase on single thread. Well, you can do that with basically any DDR4 system just by using the proper RAM. So there's a lot of takeaways here. Number one, the 12100 is a great option, sub $100 CPU, and plays all the games I tested here absolutely fine. If you're thinking about competitive games and shooters, I actually removed Apex Legends because all of the CPUs run it just fine. There's just no point. It was a very boring benchmark. It'll handle that. Now, games like Warzone, Microsoft Flight Simulator, just very, very over-the-top demanding games, it might not be able to handle that, but you're sitting yourself in a very niche scenario where you're like, I need this game to run. Most people would just be like, maybe I won't play that game, or I'll just deal with how it performs. So that is really good to see. You can get a sub $100 gaming CPU, absolutely no problem. And it's gonna compete with 6-core CPUs, as you just saw, when paired with the proper memory. Number two, more cores does not necessarily mean faster. In reality, the main advantage the 12400 has over the 12100 is the larger L3 cache. We have 12 megabytes on the 12100, and we have 18 megabytes on the 12400. So that right there, that's a 50% L3 cache increase, and that extra cache really only nets you about 12% extra performance, which is definitely noticeable. I mean, as I mentioned before, AMD is mentioning that Zen 4 in single thread will be about 15% faster than Zen 3. And so that's a sizable upgrade, but at the same time, you saw the numbers, they all perform very well. All the games tested run flawlessly on all of these CPUs. And that's really one of the points that I want to hit home. You don't need to really worry about it, as anything modern is going to run very, very well. These don't have any problems pushing a 3090 at 50% res scale on 1080p with high settings. I had to drop the resolution from 1080p because these are more powerful than this graphics card. So even something like a RTX 4090 is not going to push a 12100 all that hard in the games tested. Now granted, as I mentioned, other games are going to be different and your use case might be slightly different. But if gaming is your primary thing, these are amazing values. Now, I'm super excited to test out the 5600 and add that in here. I want to see where the Zen 3 chips stack up. And then we're going to just keep adding. I have the 10600K. I also have higher end CPUs like a 12700K Intel sent over for testing, and we'll see what the differences are. Is it really worth spending $300 on a CPU to play video games here in 2022? So stick around. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Click the little notification bell down below. Also, if you want to go ahead and chat with me tomorrow, I will be doing a live stream so we can talk about these numbers. And yeah, so if you haven't already, once again, hit that subscribe button, notification bell. Love to see you there, or I'll see you on Wednesday or Saturday on the Techonomics podcast with Paul. So yeah, I love chatting with you guys about this stuff. Love your questions. So if you have anything that I did not answer here or left out, please let me know. I look forward to talking to you guys in person. So that's all I have for you guys here today, and I will catch you guys in the next video.